My son-in-law and his family went crazy when they found out my daughter was pregnant with a girl. They threw her out of the house, calling her a useless woman. I took her in and cared for her. 3 years later, her ex-husband's family knocked on the door and were paralyzed when they saw the little girl. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please subscribe to the Elderly Stories channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my revenge story from. I want to know how far it has reached. On a Saturday afternoon under a late summer rain, the cool, damp air covered the entire small neighborhood. I was in my narrow kitchen, my hands full of dough, skillfully shaping round and fragrant sweet rolls. From the bedroom, I could hear the clear laughter of my 2 grandchildren watching cartoons, probably the one about the teddy bear they loved so much. Then the doorbell rang. 2 firm, impatient rings, as if the person outside wasn't used to waiting. I stopped, my fingers still covered in dough, motionless for a moment. My heart began to beat faster. A bad feeling crept inside me. I wiped my hands on my old worn apron and walked to the door, my feet heavy, as if I already knew what was waiting for me. I opened the door. Under the eaves, a shiny black Mercedes was parked right in front of the gate, a luxury never before seen in this neighborhood. In front of me stood Julian, my ex-son-in-law, the person I least wanted to see again. He was wearing an expensive suit, though a bit wrinkled, his damp hair stuck to his head by the rain, and a few drops trickling down his sunken cheeks gave him a very different look from the elegant man he had once been. His eyes were downcast, unable to look me in the face. Beside him were his parents, Thomas and Linda Herrera. Thomas stood tall with broad shoulders and a severe face, like someone accustomed to giving orders. Linda, as always, wore a rehearsed smile, her lips painted bright red, but her eyes were icy. In her hands she held a large basket wrapped in shiny cellophane filled with expensive bottles of wine and imported fruits. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Miller," she said in a sickeningly sweet voice. "It's raining so much that as we were passing by, we wanted to take the opportunity to say hello." She extended the basket toward me, as if it were a peace offering, an attempt to buy my goodwill. "We miss the boys so much," she continued, drawing out the words dramatically. "Children need a complete family, don't you think?" Her words were like a sharp, cold knife, though wrapped in honey. I looked at the basket, and then at her eyes. I felt a lump in my chest. I knew they hadn't come out of affection. I didn't accept the basket. I took a step back, opened the door wider, and maintained a serene expression, although inside everything was trembling. "Please come in." "It's raining outside," I said in a neutral tone, as if receiving ordinary visitors. They entered, and the sound of their footsteps echoed on the old wooden floor. Their gazes swept across the small living room where the children's toys were scattered on the chairs and the floor. I could see the judgment in Linda's eyes, comparing my simple home to her lavish mansion. Thomas sat on the sofa, rigid, not relaxing for a moment. Julian remained standing, his eyes fixed on the floor, as if he wanted to disappear. I went to the kitchen and served 3 cups of chamomile tea. I placed them on the table, trying not to let the trembling in my hands show. Linda resumed her role with a sweet but calculated voice. "We know we made mistakes. But in these 3 years, we haven't had a single night of rest. We just want to make it up to our grandson," she pronounced grandson, with intentional emphasis, like an arrow straight to the heart. I knew they had heard the rumors that they already knew about Matthew, but they didn't know the whole truth, and I wasn't about to let them get what they wanted so easily. I smiled slightly, a smile without any warmth, just to hide the contempt growing inside me. Without answering that woman, I turned around and went into the house, calling loudly enough for Anna, my daughter, to hear me. "Anna, bring the girl to say hello to her grandparents." There was a firmness in my voice I didn't know I had, as if I were preparing for a battle. There were some noises from the inner room, and then the bedroom door opened. Anna came out with a calm but determined face, like someone who has been through too much pain to still feel fear. In her arms, she carried Grace, my granddaughter, dressed in pink pajamas with bunny drawings. Her dark blonde, slightly curly hair was just like Julian's, but her bright black eyes she had inherited from her mother. Grace yawned, hugging Anna's neck, clueless about the tension filling the room. The 3 members of the Herrera family were petrified. Linda's smile froze on her face, as if she had just been slapped. Julian snapped his head up, his eyes wide open, and his lips trembling, unable to speak. Thomas, always so composed, couldn't hide his confusion either. His voice sounded broken, as if he didn't believe what he was seeing. What does this mean? Is it a girl?" I stood there in silence, looking them directly in the eyes. I let them sink into their own assumptions. 3 years ago, on the day Anna wore that snow-white wedding dress, I thought my daughter's life had finally found a safe harbor. I was there in the splendid Herrera garden where yellow lights hung from the trees, shining like in a dream. White roses and orchids adorned the place, their sweet fragrance floating in the air. I took my daughter's hand and led her down the white gravel path to the altar in place of her deceased father. Anna's dress gently grazed the floor with a long, elegant train like a cloud. She looked at me with eyes gleaming with happiness. As I gave her to Julian, I whispered with a voice choked with emotion, "Be very happy, both of you." Julian, in his impeccable black suit, looked at me sincerely and nodded firmly as if making an oath. I believed him. I believed he would protect my daughter just as my husband had protected me when he was alive. The first few months after the wedding, everything seemed perfect. Every weekend, Julian would drive his shiny car and bring Anna to visit me. He brought bags full of gifts, cakes from a famous bakery, fresh imported fruits, and even once a bottle of wine he said was special from France. He would laugh. He spoke enthusiastically, telling me about his family's business and the trips he took with Anna to places I could only dream of. "Don't worry, Mother Anna is my princess now," he used to say with pride in his voice. I would look at my daughter and see her smiling radiantly with rosy cheeks. I thought life was finally smiling on her, making up for the difficult years in that little house where it was just the two of us supporting each other after her father's death. Sometimes Anna would talk to me about her mother-in-law, Linda, with a certain caution. "My mother-in-law is demanding, but not a bad person, Mom," she would say, gently trying to reassure me. "She just insists a lot that I have to give this family a son to continue the lineage." I felt a chill, but I wanted to think it was just a custom of rich people, those who want everything to be perfect according to their rules. I tried to push the unease away to convince myself that Anna would be loved in that house just as I had always loved her. One day, Anna announced she was pregnant. I remember that moment perfectly. I was sitting on the porch sipping a cup of chamomile tea. The phone rang, and I heard Julian's excited voice. "Mom, Anna is pregnant. We're going to have a baby." I felt my eyes well up with tears, not of sadness, but of happiness. I imagined the moment of holding my grandchild in my arms, of hearing a child's laughter filling this house. The Herrera family threw a party to celebrate and invited me. The mansion was lit up, servants bustled about, and on the table were dishes I had never seen in my life. Linda raised her wine glass, smiled proudly, and declared, "This will be the pride of the Herrera family." I sat there feeling out of place amidst so much luxury, but my heart was warm. However, that happiness didn't last long. One afternoon while I was sweeping the patio, the phone rang again. It was Anna. Her voice was trembling, very different from her usual cheerful tone. "Mom," she said in a faint voice on the verge of breaking, "I just came from the ultrasound. The doctor said it's a girl." I didn't get a chance to respond. There was just a long silence on the other end, followed by the sound of a glass shattering. Then Linda's sharp, cruel voice thundered, not knowing I was listening. "A girl. How useless. The Herreras don't need a useless mouth to feed like that one." That word useless was like a knife straight to the chest. I called for Anna, but the call was abruptly cut off. I dialed her number again and again, then Julian's, but no one answered. Dozens of calls, not a single response. I felt that something terrible was about to happen. An indescribable fear gripped my chest. Exactly 1 week later at midnight, the phone rang again. I jumped up, my hands shaking as I picked it up. It was Anna's number. "Mom, help me!" Her voice broke between sobs and the whistling of the wind coming through the receiver. They kicked me out of the house. I didn't think about anything else. I grabbed my old coat, got into my rusty truck, and drove out into the torrential rain. It was raining so hard the windshield wipers were useless, but I didn't care. I only thought of Anna, my daughter, whom I swore to protect all her life. When I arrived at the Herrera mansion, the scene froze my soul. Anna, her belly already swollen, was kneeling in front of the locked gate. The rain soaked her completely, her hair stuck to her face, her shoulders trembling. Her suitcase had been thrown outside. It was open, and the baby's clothes were floating in the puddles. Those little outfits, the woolen hats I had knitted myself, now covered in mud. I looked up at the second-floor window and saw Julian's silhouette just for a second before the curtain was sharply closed. He didn't even have the courage to face us. I ran through the rain and hugged her. "Anna, it's me, Mom," I whispered with a choked voice. I took off my coat and put it over her, trying to shield her from the cold. Anna looked up, her eyes red, her face pale. "Mom, I'm sorry," she sobbed. I didn't let her finish. I helped her to her feet. I slowly led her to the truck. I picked up every piece of clothing, every tiny sock, trying to hold back my tears. I couldn't let her see me weak. Not now. When I put my hand on her shoulder to guide her to the vehicle, I held her tightly, my heart in pieces, and a silent promise echoed within me. From this day on, no one will ever hurt my daughter again. No one. The day after bringing Anna home, I immediately started cleaning her old room. It was a small room at the end of the hall, the place where she had grown up with her youthful dreams. I drew the curtains to let the sunlight in, dusted the old desk, and carefully put away the wedding photos Anna had hung on the wall. She helped me in silence without saying a word, folding blankets with slow movements, as if trying to fold away the wounds in her heart, too. The first few nights I would wake up startled by Anna's muffled sobs from the next room. Her crying was so faint it seemed she didn't want me to hear, but in that small house every sound was amplified. One night, unable to bear it any longer, I gently pushed her door open. In the dim light of the lamp, I saw Anna curled up in bed, hugging her belly, murmuring, "Forgive me, my child, forgive me." Her eyes were red, her face covered in tears. I went to her, sat beside her, and hugged her. "You have nothing to blame yourself for, Anna," I said with a trembling voice. "You are the strongest person I know." I started cooking the most nutritious dishes I knew, the same ones my mother used to make for me when I was pregnant with Anna. Black bean soup with the aroma of cumin chicken broth with ginger and freshly squeezed orange juice. "You have to eat for yourself and for the baby," I would say as I placed the plate in front of her. Anna would just nod, pick up the spoon, but her eyes remained empty. I took her for a walk every afternoon through the neighborhood, among the tree-lined streets. I hoped the fresh air and the birds singing would bring her some peace. But the neighbors' stares, the curious expressions, and the whispers behind our backs made Anna lower her head. "Mrs. Miller was your daughter, abandoned by her husband?" a neighbor asked me bluntly while I was buying vegetables at the market. I smiled coldly and replied, "I handle my family's affairs myself." But inside, I felt a deep pain. I was not only suffering for Anna, but for how cruel the world could be to her. A week later, Julian's lawyer called. His voice was smooth, overly polite, and he requested a meeting to finalize the divorce proceedings. I looked at Anna, waiting for her reaction. She nodded with a tired but firm look. "Let's go, Mom," she said. We went to a small cafe, not a fancy office as I had imagined. The tables were old wood. The smell of roasted coffee filled the air, and a hanging lamp cast a dim light like a silent mockery. Julian appeared with a cold gaze, not once looking at Anna. He sat across from us next to his lawyer, as if he were just there to close a deal. He placed a check on the table for an amount so high it left me breathless. He pushed the paper towards Anna and said in a monotone voice, "Take it and never show your face to me again." I looked at my daughter, waiting to see what she would do. Anna looked at the check and then looked up, staring him straight in the eyes. For the first time, her gaze didn't waver or show fear. "I don't need your money," she said in a clear, firm voice. She pushed the check back with a decisive gesture as if marking an end. Julian smiled contemptuously, a sneer filled with arrogance. He signed the divorce papers with a strong, dry stroke, as if wanting to erase Anna from his life. Before leaving, he said in an icy voice, "I don't have a child. That baby never existed for me." His words were the final blow, cutting off any hope that might have remained in Anna's heart. I held her hand under the table, trying not to let her see me cry. A few months later, on a stormy night, while Anna and I were folding the baby clothes I had so carefully prepared, she suddenly cried out, clutching her stomach. "Mom, it hurts so much." She whispered, her face as pale as wax. I was scared when I saw her water had broken a month ahead of schedule. I called an ambulance immediately, but the voice on the other end said the storm had knocked down trees and blocked the roads. There was no time to lose. I carried Anna to my old truck and drove through the curtain of rain. The water was halfway up the wheels, the wind whistled against the windows, but I felt no fear. I only thought of one thing: getting my daughter to a safe place. The town's health center was small and lacked everything. There was only one elderly doctor with completely white hair and 2 young nurses with worried looks. The delivery room was simple, with a strong smell of disinfectant. Anna writhed in pain, clutching my hand, her nails digging into my skin. I stayed by her side, whispering, "Hang on, sweetheart, Mom is here with you." After endless hours, the first cry was heard clear and strong. One of the nurses exclaimed, "It's a healthy baby girl!" I sighed in relief, tears rolling down my cheeks. Anna, exhausted, smiled faintly, her eyes shining with happiness. I took her hand, feeling the weight of the world disappear. But then the doctor frowned. He placed the stethoscope on Anna's belly again, noticing it hadn't gone down much. He looked up surprised. "Wait, this isn't over. There's another baby." The room fell silent. I stood frozen, unable to believe it. 15 minutes later, another cry broke the air, stronger, more vibrant. The doctor held up the baby, his voice trembling. "My God, it's a boy! She's had twins!" A boy and a girl. I hugged my 2 grandchildren, overwhelmed by a mix of joy and sadness. I looked at Anna, who was smiling through her exhaustion, and I knew we had overcome the toughest test. Days later, when Anna and the babies were out of danger, I went to the private hospital where she had her ultrasound. I asked to see the doctor who had read the results. He was a middle-aged man with a tense expression. He explained mechanically, "The pregnancy was still early. It's possible the boy was hidden behind the girl, and that's why he didn't appear on the ultrasound." His explanation didn't convince me. I knew something was wrong, but I decided not to press it. Instead, I made a decision. Matthew the boy would be our secret. The world out there, people like the Herreras, had rejected a baby just because of her gender. They didn't deserve to know about Matthew's existence. I looked at Anna, at my 2 grandchildren, and I made a promise to myself. We will raise them with love, far from the falsehood and cruelty of that family. I never thought the Herreras would dare to knock on my door again. After everything they did that rainy night, when they threw my daughter out of their house like she was trash, I thought they had cut all ties forever. But I was wrong. In reality, they never stopped watching us, waiting for the right moment. And now, hearing rumors about the twins, they appeared at my house, bringing their hypocrisy and greed out into the open. After Anna brought out little Grace, the 3 members of the Herrera family sat motionless on the sofa. The air in my small living room became thick, as if their presence had sucked out all the oxygen. Grace, in her pink bunny pajamas, yawned and rubbed her eyes, unaware of the cold stares fixed on her. Anna stood there, holding the child tightly, her face serene, but her gaze was as sharp as a razor. I knew she had learned to hide the pain, though I could feel her inner trembling in the way she clutched Grace to her chest. The first to break the silence was Linda. She forced a crooked smile, her red-painted lips trembling, trying to maintain a perfect appearance. "Oh, a girl," she said with a hesitant, insincere tone. How adorable." But her eyes didn't linger on Grace for long. They quickly darted towards the back door, from where the voices of the cartoons could still be heard. Then she looked directly at me with a voice that was sweet but cutting. "But we heard that Anna had twins. "Where is the boy, Mrs. Miller?" I felt my heart clench, but I remained calm. I slowly placed the cup of chamomile tea on the table, drawing out the moment to hide the rage boiling inside me. "Twins?" I frowned, feigning surprise. "Who told you that? There must be a misunderstanding." I looked at Anna, then at Grace, and with a soft voice full of tenderness, I replied, "My daughter only has this one girl, right, honey?" I emphasized the word one, as if to make it clear that Grace was all they needed to know about. Anna understood immediately. She held Grace tighter and nodded without a word. Her gaze cold as ice was fixed on the three in front of her without a hint of hesitation. Julian's patience seemed to be running out. He shot up from his seat. He began pacing back and forth in the living room. His shiny leather shoes creaked on the wooden floor. "Damn it!" he blurted out in frustration. "This whole trip for nothing?" He stopped, looked at me, then at Anna, with a mix of anger and disappointment in his eyes. Thomas, always so proper, also dropped his mask of courtesy. He slammed his hand on the table. The sound was faint, but enough to startle Grace and make her snuggle closer to her mother's chest. "We didn't come all this way to see some random girl," he grumbled, emphasizing the word girl, as if spitting an insult. "Where is our grandson, Mrs. Miller?" His question sounded like a declaration of war, as if he had the right to demand something they themselves had despised. His words ignited my anger, but it quickly subsided, replaced by absolute contempt. I looked at them one by one, at Linda, with her fake smile, at Thomas, with his air of superiority, and at Julian, a coward, unable to face the truth. They hadn't come for repentance. They hadn't come for love. They had come for Matthew, for the heir, for what they considered the pride of their lineage. For them, Grace, my little granddaughter, simply did not exist. I stood up, walked straight to the front door, and threw it wide open. The cold air rushed in, bringing with it the remnants of the rain. I turned to them and said in a calm but firm voice, "If you have come only to look for the legitimate grandson, I'm sorry you have the wrong house. Here there are only children who are loved." And I tilted my chin towards the exit and added without hesitation, "You can leave." Linda turned red with fury. She jumped to her feet, pointed a finger at me, and shouted, trembling with rage, "You? How dare you?" But I didn't move. I looked her straight in the eye and answered with a serene voice, "I dare. This is my house, and I do not welcome those who treat their grandchildren like merchandise." My words fell like a steel wall between us. I saw the confusion in Linda's eyes, the helplessness in Thomas's. But Julian, he just stood still, looking at Anna and Grace. For a moment, I saw a flicker of remorse in his eyes, as if he remembered what he had lost. But that light was quickly extinguished by his father's icy glare. They left with their heads down, leaving the unopened gift basket behind. I slammed the door shut. The sharp sound echoed like a final statement. Anna was behind me, hugging Grace, her shoulders trembling. I turned and hugged them both, feeling the warmth of Grace's small body and Anna's racing heartbeat. "Mom," the young woman murmured in a choked voice. "Don't be afraid, honey," I said firmly, though I was still trembling inside. "I won't let them hurt you or the children again." The weeks following the Herrera's visit passed in a false calm. My small house was still filled with the laughter of Grace and Matthew, but I couldn't shake off a sense of unease. I became more cautious. I no longer let the children play outside as before. Every time I took them to the yard, I would look around, checking if anyone was watching from a distance. I didn't want them to notice my fear, but every time a car passed by the house, my heart would sink. One afternoon, while I was mending Matthew's torn sweater, Carol, my kind neighbor, knocked on the door with a plate of freshly baked banana bread. She sat down, took a sip of her tea, and commented casually, "There's a strange man hanging around the corner these days, asking about your house, Mrs. Miller." She spoke with curiosity, with no ill intent, but her words pierced me like a needle. "What did he ask?" I said, trying to sound calm, though my hands were gripping the needle. Carol shrugged. "He asked where you lived, how many people lived here, and also about the children. I didn't tell him anything, just that he should look for himself." I smiled gratefully at her, but when she left, I remained motionless, feeling as if an invisible hand was squeezing my neck. I knew immediately that the Herreras had not given up. They had sniffed out Matthew's trail, and they wouldn't stop. That night, just after dinner, as Anna and I were finishing feeding Grace and Matthew, who were playing with colorful blocks in their room, the doorbell rang. The sharp, metallic sound rang out like a warning. Anna looked at me with concern, then instinctively picked Grace up in her arms, protecting her. I took a deep breath. I walked to the door and opened it, prepared for whatever was waiting. Under the yellowish light of the porch there were only Julian and his father Thomas. There was no shiny Mercedes anymore, but an old sedan, as if they had chosen it on purpose to appear humble to hide their true intentions. Julian stood at the door, not in his elegant suit, but in a simple gray sweater, but I immediately recognized that the look of repentance on his face was carefully rehearsed. He lowered his head, looked at the floor, and said in a trembling voice, "Mother, last time was because we were in shock. We ask you and Anna to forgive us. We were just tired." His words sounded like a memorized lesson, without a shred of sincerity. I crossed my arms, blocking the entrance without inviting them in. "Tiredness is no excuse for denying your own blood," I replied in a cold voice showing no emotion. Thomas stepped forward. His tall figure seemed to want to impose itself on me. His tone was calm, but it hid a threat. "We know everything, Mrs. Miller. We know Anna had twins, a boy and a girl. Our men saw them at the park." His words were like a bullet shattering the wall I had built to protect my family. I felt the blood rush to my head, but I forced myself to stay calm, not to show that it affected me. I looked him straight in the eye without the slightest trace of fear. "Your men?" I asked ironically. "So you're spying on us as if we were criminals?" Julian looked up for the first time, looking directly at Anna, who was standing behind me with Grace in her arms. "Anna, I beg you," he said in a trembling voice, but I knew it wasn't true repentance. "Let me see my son. I want to be his father." He emphasized the word son, as if Grace, the granddaughter Anna was holding, didn't exist. His words made me lose control. I let out a dry laugh that echoed in the silence. "Be a father," I said in a sharp tone. "You gave up that right 3 years ago when you let my daughter kneel in the rain, when you said the baby she was carrying never existed." I took a step forward, pronouncing each word firmly. "If you really miss your children, here is my daughter and my granddaughter, but you treated them like trash. You don't deserve to see either of my grandchildren again." My words were like a steel wall, relentless. I saw Julian's gaze waver, but Thomas's face remained hardened, like a man who doesn't take no for an answer. At that moment, little footsteps were heard from inside. Matthew, curious, like any child, ran out and hid behind my legs, looking at them with his big eyes. "Grandma, who are they?" he asked, with an innocent voice, not understanding anything but his question pierced my heart. Julian and Thomas's gazes fixed on Matthew filled with desire and greed. I could clearly see what they wanted, not out of love, but for what they called the heir. Gently, I pushed Matthew back inside and closed the room's door, shielding him from those stares. "Go play with your sister, honey," I said in a sweet voice, trying to keep him from noticing the tension. Thomas's mask finally fell. He stepped closer, his voice a threat. "Don't you dare act like this. You are preventing us from seeing our grandson. We will sue you." Julian intervened, his tone firmer, as if he had regained his courage. "The law will be on our side. The boy needs his father. He needs a better future than this miserable place." The word miserable was like a slap in the face. I looked around my small house where I had raised Anna and protected my grandchildren. It might not be luxurious, but it was full of love, and he who had abandoned his own blood dared to call it miserable. I looked directly into his eyes without a shred of fear. "Do it," I said in a calm but cold voice. "I'm not afraid of liars. I am ready to face you in court." I took a step back. I put my hand on the doorknob and slammed the door shut in their faces. The sharp click of the lock resonated like a firm declaration. They had no place in our lives. Just a week after the Herrera family left my house with faces full of anger, a mailman appeared at the door. He handed me a thick envelope with the red seal of the city court. I stood there, envelope in hand, my heart beating so fast it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I knew immediately it was what I had been dreading. I went inside, opened the envelope, and every line of the lawsuit was like a stab. The Herreras were demanding recognition of paternity between Julian and Matthew, as well as claiming full custody of Matthew Herrera. They had even already given the boy their last name, as if he were an object they could claim. Anna, sitting beside me, read the document with trembling hands as silent tears streamed down her cheeks. "Mom," she whispered, her voice broken. I hugged her tightly and tried to stay strong. "Don't be afraid, Anna. The truth will be on our side." But inside I was trembling too. Not for fear of losing, but because I knew this battle would drag my family into a new storm. The next morning, as I opened the region's most important newspaper, a scandalous headline jumped out at me. "Herrera family tragedy. Selfish grandmother prevents them from seeing their legitimate grandson." It was accompanied by a carefully staged photo. Julian, looking gaunt, sat next to his elderly parents. Linda dabbed at her eyes with an expensive handkerchief. The article's content was a complete lie. They claimed they had been deceived about Matthew's existence, that they had tried to reconcile, but that Anna and I had prevented it. Worse, they insinuated that we were holding the child to extort money from their wealthy family. I read those words, crumpling the newspaper in my fist, as rage washed over me quickly, replaced by a deep sadness. They not only wanted to take Matthew from me, they also wanted to destroy our honor, to make us look greedy and cruel to the world. The consequences of the article came immediately. That morning I took Grace and Matthew to the market as usual. The children held my hand, telling me stories from kindergarten, but I noticed the strange looks around us. The vegetable seller, who used to greet me cheerfully, now just silently weighed the produce before turning away. A nearby fruit vendor muttered to a customer, "You see, they're keeping the boy to get money from the rich." I heard every word like needles in my heart. I squeezed Grace's and Matthew's hands and forced a smile so they wouldn't notice anything, although inside my soul felt heavy. On the way back, Matthew asked innocently, "Grandma, why didn't the vegetable lady give me a candy today?" I just stroked his head and replied in a choked voice, "She ran out of candy. I'll buy you one tomorrow." Ijan. Okay. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about the candy, but about the judgment of the outside world. The monthly book club meeting, once a source of joy among books and shared stories, had become an invisible barrier. The president, who used to invite me for tea, suddenly changed the day's topic to the importance of family lineage. My old friends avoided my gaze. Some whispered among themselves as I passed. I tried to stay for a few minutes, but the atmosphere became unbearable. I got up, packed my things, and left halfway through the meeting. Outside, the evening light fell on my shoulders, but I felt more alone than ever. The betrayal of those I thought were friends tore my soul apart. I wondered if there was still a place for truth in this world, but I knew I couldn't just sit and wait. I couldn't let the Herreras continue to spin their story full of lies. I went to see Mr. Rogers, an old friend of my late husband. Mr. Rogers was retired, but his reputation as a fair man still echoed in the town. I went to his house, a small cottage with a garden full of yellow daisies. He listened attentively as I told him everything. From the night Anna was thrown out of the Herrera's house to the time they showed up demanding to see Matthew. When I finished, he nodded with a serious but warm look. "Mrs. Miller, I will help you with this case, not for money, but for justice." His words were like a ray of light in the darkness, and I felt I was no longer alone. We began to gather evidence. I returned home and opened an old wooden box I kept in the closet where I keep family mementos. Inside was Anna's divorce file with the document signed by Julian, where he voluntarily renounced all rights and responsibilities for the unborn child. I also found a yellowed sheet of paper that Julian had written in anger, throwing it at Anna, along with a check where he cruelly said, "I want nothing to do with you or that child." Every time I read that sentence, I felt a deep pain, but I also knew it was our best weapon. In addition, I prepared documents showing that for 3 years, Anna and I had covered all the expenses of raising the children, milk, diapers, doctor's visits. Not a single dollar came from the Herreras. Every receipt, every bill was proof of our strength, and I kept them all in a thick folder. Meanwhile, the Herrera's lawyer constantly appeared in the newspapers, giving interviews in a tragic tone. They spoke of the pain of a separated family, of the love they felt for a grandson they had never met. Every word was a layer of false paint, hiding their selfishness and greed. Anna and I decided to remain silent. Mr. Rogers told me in a calm but firm voice, "Let them talk, Mrs. Miller. The more they talk, the more mistakes they'll make. We will speak only once in court." His words gave me strength, though the worry was still there. Every night I sat in the living room watching my grandchildren sleep, and I would wonder, if we lose, how will I be able to protect them? The night before the trial, Anna and I sat across from each other in the living room. The yellow light from the bulb illuminated her face, making her look both strong and fragile. "Mom," she said in a trembling voice, "what if we lose?" Her question pierced my soul, but I took her hand and pointed to the stack of documents on the table. "The truth is here," I replied firmly, "and the truth never loses." I tried to smile to reassure her, but inside I could only pray. I prayed for justice for my grandchildren, and for Anna, who had already suffered too much. On the day of the trial in the city's family court, the room was thick with tension. The air was heavy, filled with curious glances. On the left, journalists waited with their cameras ready to turn our story into sensational headlines. On the right, town neighbors, some of whom were once friendly, now turned their backs on me. I saw them whispering, pointing, and I felt a lump in my chest. Anna, Mr. Rogers, and I sat in the front row. Anna squeezed my hand tightly, her fingers cold as ice, seeking refuge in my presence. I gently stroked her hand, trying to convey a sense of calm, though I was struggling to maintain it myself. On the other side, the Herrera family sat with straight backs like cold statues. Julian wore his most expensive suit, but his face was pale and his eyes were empty, as if trying to hide his anxiety. Linda wore dark sunglasses, looking more like someone on vacation than a person at a trial, and Thomas maintained an iron expression, like a man used to giving orders and never losing. Seeing him, I felt an icy rage run down my spine, but I told myself to stay calm. This wasn't just a battle for Matthew, but also for my family's honor, for everything we had endured. The Herrera's lawyer, a young, well-groomed man, stood up to begin his opening statement. He spoke with great eloquence, as if acting in a packed theater. He spoke of the sacred paternal bond that had been broken, of the pain of grandparents who couldn't see their grandson. He showed receipts for expensive toys and children's clothing that the Herreras had recently purchased, as if they were proof of their affection. I looked at those receipts and felt my stomach clench. Those things weren't out of love, but part of the show they had put on to get Matthew. Then he called his witness, and my heart stopped when I saw the president of the book club take the stand. The woman who had invited me for tea, who used to smile kindly, now avoided my gaze. She testified in a monotone voice. "The Miller family seems to be living much better lately. I heard they received money from somewhere." Her words were like a knife, implying we were using Matthew for financial gain. The courtroom murmured, and I felt the stares on me, as if I were a greedy and selfish woman. Anna squeezed my hand tighter, and I knew she was holding back tears. When our turn came, Mr. Rogers took his time. He called me as the first witness. I stood up with trembling legs, but with a firm heart. As I took the stand and looked at the courtroom, I felt as if my entire life was being judged. The Herrera's lawyer looked at me with a mocking smile and asked a provocative question. "Mrs. Miller, you held on to the boy, hoping to get some benefit from my client's wealthy family, didn't you?" The room murmured again, and the whispers were like needles pricking my chest. I took a deep breath, looked him in the eye, and then turned to Julian, saying in a low but firm voice that resonated throughout the room, "Benefit. I have only cared for what you abandoned." I began to speak every word coming from the depths of my soul. I told them about that rainy night 3 years ago, when I found Anna kneeling in front of the Herrera's gate, her belly swollen and the baby's clothes thrown in the mud. I described Julian's silhouette behind the curtain, watching her without coming out to help. I recounted the days and nights that followed when Anna and I faced everything alone without a single dollar of help from the Herreras. Silence filled the room. Only my voice could be heard, slow but full of strength. I saw some people lower their heads, others wipe away tears. I wasn't speaking to inspire pity. I was speaking for the truth to come out. Mr. Rogers stood up and began to present the evidence. The large screen in the courtroom lit up. First, he read aloud the clause from the divorce decree, where Julian signed voluntarily waiving all rights and responsibilities for the unborn child. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a stern gaze, asked Julian to confirm the signature. He mumbled barely audible, "Yes, it's mine." The whole courtroom gasped, and I saw his face turn even paler. Then Mr. Rogers presented the original handwritten letter from Julian to the judge and projected the image on the screen. The sentence, "I want nothing to do with you or the baby," appeared clearly like a knife that shattered the Herrera family's charade. A murmur of astonishment swept through the room. The journalists started taking pictures nonstop. I looked at Julian. His head was bowed, and his hands were clenched on the arm of the chair. Linda took off her dark sunglasses, her eyes filled with panic while Thomas remained motionless, as if trying to hold on to the last shred of pride. Finally, Mr. Rogers opened the old file and pointed out that there was a record of Anna being kicked out of the house while pregnant, and that the Herreras had only paid a small sum of money to keep the matter quiet. His voice became firm. "They didn't deny their actions, Your Honor. They only paid to hide them." His words fell like a blow, leaving the Herreras' lawyer speechless. He tried to defend himself, searching for convoluted arguments, but everything was useless against such clear evidence. The judge looked directly at the Herrera family with a stern but fair expression. "This trial is not about paternity, but about honor and responsibility," she said in a resonant voice. "It is clear that you abandoned that child 3 years ago." She struck the gavel hard on the desk, the sharp sound marking the final sentence. "The court denies Mr. Julian Herrera's petition. Legal custody of the minors, Matthew and Grace Miller, belongs exclusively to their mother, Mrs. Anna Miller, and their grandmother." I felt as if the whole world had stopped. Anna hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. I hugged her back, feeling the warmth and relief emanating from both of us. Mr. Rogers smiled, put his hand on my shoulder and whispered, "We did it, Mrs. Miller." I looked over at the Herrera's side. The two elderly people had their heads bowed, and Julian remained motionless, his face as pale as paper. At that moment I didn't feel satisfaction, but a deep sadness. They had lost, but the price of their selfishness and lies was something they would carry for the rest of their lives. When the courtroom door closed behind us, I walked out with Anna. The crowd of journalists swarmed us with microphones and cameras pointed at us. This time, their looks were not of judgment, but of empathy, as if they finally understood a little of our story. Mr. Rogers, with his usual calm, stepped forward and raised his hand to hold them back. He said only one short sentence in a firm voice: "Justice has been served." I looked at him, my heart full of gratitude. Those words, though simple, felt like a fresh breeze that lifted some of the weight I had been carrying. On the other side, the Herrera family was not so lucky. They were surrounded by reporters' flashes going off non-stop, and the shouts of the public filled the air. Julian, his face ashen, tried to push through the crowd, while Thomas and Linda needed bodyguards to get to the car. I watched them leave with their heads down, and again I felt no pleasure, only a deep sadness. They had dug their own grave, and now they had to pay the price for their selfishness and deceit. The next morning I woke up early, made a cup of chamomile tea, and opened the region's largest newspaper. The headline jumped out at me: "The truth behind the Herrera family case, denied visitation rights for gender discrimination and family abandonment." And the article detailed the hearing from the irrefutable evidence we presented to the incompetence of the Herreras' lawyer. They revealed the real story the night Anna was thrown out of her house, the handwritten letter full of venom from Julian, and the truth that the Herreras were never interested in Grace only because she was a girl. I read with trembling hands, not out of anger, but because the truth had finally been acknowledged. My family's honor, which they tried to tarnish, was now restored. The consequences for the Herreras came faster than I imagined. A few days later, a major international partner of the Herrera Construction Company announced the cancellation of their contract with a clear reason. We do not collaborate with a company whose leadership lacks ethics. Their stocks plummeted, and I heard that other investors also began to withdraw their money. Thomas, always so proud of his position, was forced to resign as chairman of the board, a direct blow to his pride. Linda, who had always lived for appearances, fell seriously ill. She dared not leave the house and cut off all social contact, as if trying to hide from judging eyes. I felt no pity, but no joy either. They reaped what they sowed, and I just wished they would leave my family in peace. But Julian, instead of repenting, became more resentful. I heard he felt publicly humiliated, stripped of everything. For someone like him, failure is never easy to accept. Months later, high society was buzzing with the news. Businessman Julian Herrera is engaged to Miss Valerie Ledesma, the only daughter of the president of the National Bank. Their wedding was lavish, 10 times more luxurious than the one he had with Anna. The newspaper photos showed an elegant Julian next to a radiant bride in a garden full of flowers and lights. It was said that he was trying to get back on his feet to prove he was still a winner, that he could have something better. But looking into his eyes in those photos, I saw an emptiness that was impossible to hide. Our life, meanwhile, slowly returned to normal, though a different kind of normal. One morning, Mrs. Carroll, the neighbor who had warned me about the suspicious men, knocked on my door with a plate of banana bread. "Mrs. Miller, I'm sorry," she said with a look full of guilt. "I believed the lies in the newspapers. I was wrong." I smiled, accepted the plate, and invited her in for tea. The women from the book club also started contacting me again, inviting me to meetings. One of them, Mrs. Rosa, even sent me a handwritten letter telling me she was ashamed for having doubted me. I read the letter with relief, though not without a certain sadness. My family's honor had been restored, but the scars from the trial days were still there, dormant in my heart. Anna, during all this time, changed. She no longer cried nor held grudges. One afternoon, while I was folding Grace and Matthew's clothes, she came in with a newspaper featuring Julian's lavish wedding. I waited for a reaction, a tear, a bitter word, but Anna just calmly folded the newspaper and left it on the table. "It doesn't matter to me anymore, Mom," she said in a calm but firm voice. "He can live whatever life he wants, but I have Grace and Matthew. That's enough." I looked at her and saw that strength had replaced the pain of the past, and I felt a deep pride in my chest. That night, while reading a story to Grace and Matthew before bed, I glanced at the newspaper still on the table. The wedding photo of Julian and Valerie Ledesma shone under the light, but I just smiled to myself. I thought, a person who tries to prove they are happy is usually the emptiest inside. I didn't think it to mock Julian, but because it was a truth I had learned over the years. True happiness is not in what you show the world, but in moments like this when I sit here listening to my grandchildren's laughter and feeling the warmth of my family. 3 years have passed since the trial, and our life has found a new rhythm, though it's not always easy. Anna got a part-time accounting job at a small bookstore in the center of town. She doesn't earn much, but it's enough to have her own income and, most importantly, to regain her confidence. I see how her eyes light up every time she talks about the new books that arrive or when she helps a customer find their favorite novel. Those moments give me peace, as if I'm watching her slowly heal the wounds the Herrera family left behind. Matthew and Grace are now 6 years old and have started elementary school. Matthew is a restless boy, always running around the house hugging his soccer ball as if it were a treasure. He can spend the whole day playing in the yard with the neighborhood kids, smiling even when he's drenched in sweat. Grace, on the other hand, is calmer. She likes to sit by the window and draw. Her drawings full of daisies fill my heart with a warmth that's hard to explain. Those two children are the joy and light of this house. Every night when they cuddle up next to me to listen to a story or laugh at some silly thing, I feel that everything I've been through has been worth it. Sometimes I still hear rumors about the Herrera family. Their company managed to get out of the crisis thanks to the support of the Ledesmas, but they never regained the prestige they once had. Thomas is now just a shadow of his former self and hardly appears at social events. Linda, who lived for appearances, has practically disappeared from high society parties. I don't think much about them, but those stories reach me as a reminder that justice, though it may be slow, always finds its way. One autumn evening, with the air a bit chilly, I was clearing the table after dinner. Anna was checking Grace and Matthew's homework, smiling from time to time, when Matthew showed her an exercise the teacher had praised. The house was calm, only the rustling of notebook pages and the children's whispers could be heard. Then the doorbell rang, 2 sharp knocks, like a knife cutting through the silence. My heart leaped, as if the memories of the confrontations with the Herreras came rushing back. Anna looked up, a flicker of concern in her eyes. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands on my apron, and went to open the door. Under the yellowish light of the porch, I saw Julian. He was no longer the same man from 3 years ago, without his elegant suit or his haughty gaze. He was wearing a worn-out coat, looked thin with a grown-out beard and a haggard face. The deep dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. He stood there hunched over, like a man defeated by life. He mumbled in a hoarse voice, looking at the ground. "I'm not here to claim the children. I just want to apologize." I stood there in silence at the doorway without inviting him in. I wanted to hear what he had to say, but there was no room for trust left in me. He took a deep breath and began to speak. His voice choked, as if each word was a struggle to get out. He spoke about his marriage to Valerie Ledesma, an economic contract more than a love story. "She's beautiful, but cold," he said with a bitter smile. "She always wants to control everything. She's always jealous of my past. She says I'm a failure because I couldn't keep my children." He said they had tried all kinds of treatments, both at home and abroad, but after 3 years they still couldn't have children. The doctor said the problem was Valerie's, but the Herrera family didn't dare to confront her, as their company depended on the national bank owned by her father. He described their luxurious mansion as a cold tomb without laughter or warmth. "Every night," he said, his voice breaking, "I go to bed in an empty room and I hear children laughing. I imagine Matthew and Grace. I imagine them saying Daddy for the first time, taking their first steps. I destroyed all of that with my own hands." He looked up with pleading eyes, tears streaming down his sunken cheeks. "I had everything in my hands," he said, "and I lost it because of my stupidity and my family's. I don't expect to be forgiven, Mrs. Miller. I just want to see them from a distance, just once." His words sounded like a prayer, but I felt no compassion. Not because I hated him, but because I knew that forgiveness was not mine to give. I turned back towards the house and called out softly, "Anna, honey, come here." Anna came out, still holding Grace in her arms. The little girl looked at Julian without any expression. Her calmness was more terrifying than any anger. Julian watched her like a convict before his judge with his head bowed. "Anna," he murmured, but she didn't let him finish. Anna looked at him for a long moment before speaking, her voice calm and serene. "I already forgave you, Julian, a long time ago." He raised his head, a glimmer of hope in his eyes, but Anna continued in the same tone. "But I forgave you not to get back with you, nor for you to be a part of my children's lives. I forgave you so I could be at peace with myself." Her words were like a clean cut, without resentment or anger, just the truth spoken simply. Then she took a step back, stood next to me, and hugged Grace tightly. "Go," Anna said, her voice not trembling. Julian stood still, as if he wanted to say something more, but Anna's gaze made it clear that there was nothing left to say. He turned and walked away under the dim streetlight, his thin figure slowly disappearing into the darkness. After that night, Julian appeared at my door. He never bothered us again. But sometimes on weekend afternoons, I would see his old sedan parked at the end of the street. He never knocked on the door, never asked for anything. He would just stand there near the wooden fence, leaving a few things: a remote control car, a case of colored markers, or a box of cookies that Grace and Matthew loved. These gifts were always wrapped carefully, accompanied by a small note written in a shaky hand for the children. Matthew and Grace, with the innocence of children, would always run excitedly to receive the gifts. "Oh, the kind uncle has arrived," Matthew would shout, hugging the toy car tightly, his eyes shining with joy. Grace, holding a box of colored pencils, would murmur a shy, "Thank you," before turning to me to show off. "Grandma the teacher told me today that I draw very well." Julian would just stand there smiling, but his smile was sad, and his eyes were moist. Once he bent down to quickly hug the children for just a few seconds. Then he straightened up and walked away without looking back. Anna and I watched him from the window without saying a word. There was no anger or satisfaction, just a silent acceptance. The children didn't know he was their father, and maybe it was better that way. On the anniversary of my husband's death, like every year, Anna and I took Grace and Matthew to visit his grave. The cemetery was on the outskirts of town, where rows of eucalyptus trees stood tall and the leaves whispered in the wind. I cleaned the headstone and placed a bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums on it, my husband's favorite flowers. Grace and Matthew played nearby, their pure laughter echoing in the quiet air. I sat by the grave and whispered softly to him, "You see, my love, we're okay. Anna is stronger than you thought, and the grandchildren are our greatest joy." Anna sat next to me, resting her head on my shoulder without saying anything. I felt the warmth of her body, and for a moment a deep peace enveloped me. Then Anna spoke, her voice as soft as the wind. "Mom, I don't hate Julian anymore. I just feel relief. Seeing him like this doesn't make me happy." Her words left me speechless. I stroked her hair and smiled. "You've learned a lesson that many adults never understand. Sometimes the real victory isn't in defeating the enemy, but in finding peace within yourself." Anna nodded with a new light in her eyes, as if she had just let go of an invisible weight. I looked at her and saw the maturity that pain had forged in her, and I was filled with pride. When we got home, it was already late afternoon. The sunset light painted the small street gold, with the houses hidden among the trees. I was opening the door when I saw Julian there in front of the fence. This time, he didn't bring any gifts. He was just standing there like a shadow, his hands in the pockets of his worn-out coat. His face looked more gaunt than the last time I saw him, with deeper dark circles. He looked at me, and in his eyes there was no longer any plea, only the weariness of someone who has gone through too many losses. Matthew and Grace saw him and immediately ran towards him. "Kind uncle," Matthew shouted, pulling on his hand as he said excitedly, "Uncle, today we went to visit Grandpa." "Grandpa is on the hill. There are many beautiful trees there," Grace chimed in with a soft voice. "I made a drawing for Grandpa." "Do you want to see it?" Julian bent down, stroking their heads with a sad smile on his lips. Then Matthew, with the innocence of a child, asked, "Uncle, do you have a dad? Does your dad love you?" The child's innocent question was like a stab. Julian froze. He couldn't answer. He just lowered his head and squeezed Grace and Matthew's hair tightly, as if he wanted to hold on to that moment a little longer. Anna was at the doorway watching the scene. In her eyes there was no storm, no pain, no resentment. I stood by her side, feeling the strength that emanated from her. Julian looked up, looked at Anna, and then at me. His gaze seemed to want to say something, but the words didn't come out. He turned and walked away. His thin silhouette slowly disappeared into the colors of the sunset. Grace and Matthew ran into the house laughing and talking nonstop about their day, as if the visit from that kind man had been just a fleeting moment. I looked up at the clear blue sky where some birds were returning to their nest. I felt a strange peace, as if the whole storm was behind me, leaving a soft silence. I didn't know what the future held. Would Julian continue to come every weekend, watching his children from afar? Would Grace and Matthew one day discover the truth about their father? I don't know, but I do know one thing for sure. We have survived the storm and found our own refuge in the calm. I went into the house, saw Anna playing with the children, and laughter filled the place. I smiled, sat down with them, and in my heart I gave thanks that my family was still together, no matter how the world changed outside. After everything we've been through, I understood that life is never easy for those who choose the right path, but it is in pain that one learns what it means to be strong. I understood that true love does not come from prestige, nor from money, nor from a last name, but from silent sacrifice and the heart that protects what is just. Happiness is not in mansions, but in the smiles of children who grow up surrounded by love. Forgiving is not weakness, it is freeing oneself from the chains of hatred. I did not win with money or power, but with the faith that the truth sooner or later always comes to light. And the most valuable thing I learned was that when a mother or a grandmother stands up to protect her family, no power in the world can bring her down. The story you have just heard has had names and places changed to protect the identity of the people involved. We don't tell it to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? I sincerely wonder if you were in my place. What would you do? Would you remain silent to keep the peace? Or would you face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion because every story can be a light on someone else's path. God always blesses, and I firmly believe that courage will lead us to better days.